Good morning. I am Maura Striano from the University of Naples Federico II. I'm not able to come to the conference in person together with Stefano Maltese, who is the co-author of this research, and I am apologizing for this. But we wanted to share our research and our results, and also we will be connected via Zoom after the presentation so that you can pose questions to us and we can answer to you. We have organized a video presentation for this session so that you can have track of our research. You can see the video again, watch the video again through YouTube channel, and so we can have a basis for discussion for further collaboration. Thank you for joining us in this presentation. And I want to start with our focus on research. Our hypothesis, which was confirmed by the research data, and actually the hypothesis was developed during the research. I mean, while we were collecting the data of the research, we understood that we could interpret the data according to a transformative learning framework. And we have tried to confirm this through a sound analysis of the narrative transcripts of the interviews that we have collected. So I'm going to present you our hypothesis and our research. Our hypothesis that the coming out process in young adults can be understood and explored as a process of transformative learning according to the 10 phases described by Jack Mezirow. So the title of our presentation is The Transformative Potential of Coming Out Narratives in Young Adults' Life. And we have to focus on what is coming out in psychological and in educational terms. Coming out is in the life of young adults has to be conceived as a challenging experience. That's why, because it is a process which helps the people in realizing their sexual orientation and together with their self-identification. And also because coming out can trigger a critical and reflective process functioning as a disorienting dilemma, the outcome of which may be a full subjectivation of life courses. We have understood coming out either as a step of the process of the growth of homosexual individuals according to the framework designed by Cass and Coleman, and also as an educational, informative opportunity to speak of oneself and to express one's ideas, feelings, and understandings through actions of speech and discourse. So coming out is also connected to a vision of the discourse and speech as a performative act. So coming out cannot be reduced only to speaking about one's feeling to other people. So it's not a confidential disclosure, but it's much more. It's a performative act realized through speech. So it's a speech act that has the potential of an action. And transformative learning, as designed by Mezirow, can be understood as a framework to explore coming out in the life process of young adults. because the coming out can be understood as a transformative experience in itself. Not only with regard to the clarification of one's sexual orientation, but also to a full subjectivation of life courses, following a critical and reflective pattern. We can identify the process before coming out, I mean the step before coming out as a disorienting dilemma, because the person has to decide what she or he wants to be, and which is the life path that she or he wants to follow. And so this is a disorienting dilemma in the life course. And this disorienting dilemma opens up the possibility of a transformative learning, which helps the individual in advancing his or her personal growth. We have posed some educational and pedagogical questions which frame our research. One is connected to the pedagogical nexus that makes the narrative practice of declaring oneself homosexual an educational practice, and a potentially transformative practice. This possibility is connected to the chance that people have of manifesting to the world their own authenticity, making much more evident the main goal of their own growth, and in particular of adolescent growth towards adulthood. And also we have focused on what the educational system and what the educational people who have educational roles can do in order to help and facilitate this process. Taking into account that this process and the outcomes of this process should be transformative outcomes. So the educational agency should be a transformative agency in general, but in particular for this specific task and case. Our research hypothesis, which as I told before, came out during the research process itself, is that coming out can be understood as a transformative learning experiences, taking into account that the fact that the person himself or herself represents a disorienting dilemma with regard to the determination of his or her objective of gender identity. So our research objective connected to this hypothesis was to identify the challenges, the dilemmas, and the new understandings that produce the educational transformation in the coming out process. The issue of homosexuality addressed in the interviews collected in the research, and then later I will show you the framework of the research by Stefano Maltese, who is the co-author of the research. Is the co-author and is also the person who made the interviews and analyzed the interviews. Has been treated in close connection with the narrative practice of speaking of oneself to oneself and to others within the interviews and also within the briefing process after the interviews. We have used the narrative methodology within a general qualitative research framework. So our study is a qualitative research study, and in particular is a narrative inquiry research focused on 17 autobiographical narrative interviews with young homosexual adults who have identified in their coming out the turning point of their existential condition. Our sample, the sampling strategies that we have been using is non-probabilistic sampling. We have chosen to interview young homosexual adults between 17 and 19 residents living in our region, which is a southern region. And the recruitment took place through the internet, Facebook, chats, websites and blogs, and through the participation in the events of the LGBT community, and through also words of mouth among the boys themselves. So it was like a snowball sampling. We have constructed it as a snowball sampling. We have collected 17 narrative interviews, then we have transcribed the interviews, we have sent back the interviews to the individuals so that they could change something in the story, add something in the story, and we have discussed also the outcomes of our reading of the interviews with the people who have been interviewed. So we had the constant exchange of ideas with the sample, and also they've been engaged in the process of understanding and of interpretation of the interviews. We have used also a triangulation methodology in order to identify the categories coming out from the interviews, and we have discussed the categories among the researchers using a triangulation procedure. After this process of collecting and analyzing the interviews, we can show some data which we believe are interesting to validate our hypothesis. Through the analysis of the transcripts of the interviews, we have identified the different transformative steps identified by Mezzrow in all the 17 interviews of the young people. So we can say that even if we have a small sample, we have had a saturation process in our data analysis. And so we have identified three general steps within which we can see the 10 phases of the transformative learning process. The first step is the recognition about one's one story. And so, starting from the disorienting dilemma, which is the person himself or herself trying to overcome the uneasiness of not being what one feels to be. We have the following step is the self-examination with feelings of guilt or shame. For example, a boy told us that he felt like an alien. He didn't want to accept himself, and he wanted to try to avoid the problem and behaving as an heterosexual within the context. And after this step, also we could identify the following step, so the critical assessment of epistemic, sociocultural or psychic assumptions. For example, we can tell from this excerpt of a narrative, one of the narrative interviews, I am surprised if I look back. I remember how, as I was growing up, I had been trying to put off my feelings, to reduce them, at least in public situations, to be ashamed of them in a certain sense. So there is a critical assessment of the feelings and also of the cognitive and relational strategies that people have used to overcome or to manage the problem. and also the focus on one's discontent and the need to share feelings and ideas with other people, and the acknowledgement that other people share this process, so it can be a common a support also in this process. And we can say, for example, in this interview, then I met a friend. He's very open, and in talking with him, I discovered myself. So the process of transformation can be a shared process, a process that can be supported by other people. And it is important, especially in the young homosexual community. The second step is the second phase is the phase of self-determination. So within this phase we have identified the exploration of options for new roles, relationships and actions, the planning of new course of action, and also the acquisition of knowledge and skills for implementing one's plan. For example, we have the exploration of options for new roles to the psychological support. And the planning of new course of action is connected to a new awareness of what the person was to have as a life plan in the future. So the awareness which leads to life design. And the acquisition of knowledge and skills for implementing one's plan is connected also to the elaboration of one's experiences, as we can say in the narratives. Finally, people try new roles in their life, and they see how these new roles fit with their identity, and so they become to feel safe and confident in these new roles. For example, the metaphor of the stairway used by one of our interview, young adults, it's very effective, because he says that it is a stairway, but through this passage he could try himself in new roles and discover that he was feeling well in this role. This role was suitable for him, and so he became more and more confident, but it took time for him. And at the end, we have this final outcome, which is the construction of a new future, so a new understanding about the future, through the building up of new competencies and self-confidence in new roles and relationship, and also the final reintegration into individual life of this new idea of the self connected to an homosexual identity. And so we can see this, for example, in the two narratives that we have selected. I went to Rome, and there started a rebirth. So the metaphor of a rebirth is very effective in this being safe and being confident in new roles, and also the possibility to recompose the relationship that the person has with his environment, the family, and the friends. After my outing, I have started dating with no problems. I have totally changed. I have a new will to live, and I have a new relationship with my family. We also have identified through all the process described in the interviews, the making and the changing of different learning perspectives and meaning perspectives. For example, we have identified the change of epistemic perspectives, the change of psychological perspectives, and the social-linguistic perspective. We can tell, for example, from one story, when the epistemic position of the person was to a position refusing even the possibility to think, and then the person also starts to question. So from the avoidance of thinking to the questioning, to a questioning position, which is very interesting from an epistemic point of view. Also, the psychological perspectives change. A person that felt uncomfortable, that others believed that he was heterosexual, the shame the people were feeling. And the transformation can be easily identified to social-linguistic perspectives. For example, through the analysis of the metaphors that have been used in the narrative process. So my home is like a minefield, or the metaphor that I mentioned before is a stairway. I started to play a sort of hide and seek. So it's very interesting to analyze also the metaphors coming out in the process. As a conclusion, so we can tell that the transformative learning process occurs in the coming out process and through the coming out process. And it is also interesting to identify the temporal dimensions of the process. So focusing on the past experiences which are brought in the process of transformative learning as a resource. So people can learn from the past experience, from the present experiences, but also they learn from the future. They learn through the project that they have, and how this project can be challenging, but also how this process can be requiring new resources to be used. And so we can confirm the hypothesis that coming out is a process which implies transformative learning, starting from a disorienting dilemma. And we can identify the different phases of the transformative learning process. And also we can say that the learning outcomes are capitalized in the life of the persons. They are capitalized in terms of new awareness and in terms of new understanding. And these elements are capitalized at an individual level, but most of all they are shared with other people, so they become a resource for other people. And this is a very interesting outcome that we have identified. So I thank you very much for your patience and for your attention, and we are very willing to have your comments on our research. And if you are interested in being engaged in the further developments of our research, we are grateful to contact you. Thank you so much.